It was an evening like no other. The mansion stood silently, its opulent chandeliers casting soft, golden glows across the polished marble floors. The sound of a crackling fireplace echoed faintly through the grand hall. But in that moment, something extraordinary was about to unfold. "Maid, shut up!" The billionaire's voice echoed through the massive dining room, cold and sharp like a winter's chill. His words cut through the air, but what happened next left everyone in stunned silence. "I will not, Mr. Langford," she said quietly, her voice trembling but firm. "And if you want to know why, it's because you don't know what true pain is." Richard Langford, the billionaire who had everything, money, power, status, stood frozen. The words that came from his maid, a simple woman named Hope, were words he never expected to hear, especially not from someone who served him without question for years. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Hope's face was unreadable, a mask of quiet defiance. But Richard's face flushed with anger. He was used to people obeying him, not questioning him, yet here she was, standing up to him in a way that shocked him to his core. Was it disrespect? Or was it something else entirely? The question hung in the air like a dense fog, and no one moved. But before Richard could respond, Hope spoke again, her voice soft, yet carrying a weight that seemed to press down on the very walls of the mansion. "You have everything, Mr. Langford, but you don't know the cost of it. You never have." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Richard standing in the dining room, his mind racing, his heart pounding. What was it that she meant? What did she know that no one else did? The question lingered, unanswered. The billionaire, with all his wealth and success, was now the one left speechless. But Hope, the maid, had left him with a mystery so deep that he couldn't ignore it. Why had she spoken like that? What was she hiding? Was it all just anger? Or was there something more? Let's rewind a little, to the beginning of this unusual relationship. Richard Langford, at 70 years old, was a man who had everything most people could only dream of. A self-made billionaire, he owned luxury homes around the world, private jets, yachts, and all the finest things money could buy. But none of that could protect him from the loneliness that filled his massive mansion, or the pain that he hid so well behind his sharp suits and expensive watches. Hope, the maid, had been working for Richard for over a decade. She was in her late 20s, with a kind heart that had always been evident, even though life had never been kind to her. She came from a small town, a life full of struggle, but somehow she had found herself employed by one of the richest men in the country. At first, she had been like any other maid, just trying to get by. But over time, she became more than that to Richard. She became someone he could rely on, someone who showed him empathy in a way no one else did. While others only saw Richard for his wealth, Hope saw something else. She saw a man who, despite everything, was still searching for something deeper. It was in the little things that Hope showed Richard the compassion he had forgotten. She would listen when he spoke, never dismissing his words, no matter how trivial. She treated him like a human being, not a billionaire. And slowly, Richard began to appreciate her presence in his life. But what was it about Hope that caused her to speak those words to him? She wasn't one to challenge authority, let alone stand up to her boss in such a dramatic way. Something had changed. Something deep inside of her had shifted, and it was now unraveling in front of Richard in a way he hadn't expected. As Hope walked away from the dining room, Richard stood still, staring at the spot where she had been. His mind raced, and an unfamiliar feeling stirred within him. Was it fear? Regret? Or was it something else? Something he couldn't quite put his finger on. The next few days were a blur of events, but nothing seemed to shake the feeling Richard had after that evening. The words from Hope echoed in his mind. You don't know what true pain is. He couldn't let go of it. He needed answers. Richard Langford, a man who had the world at his feet, now found himself questioning everything. How had his maid, a woman who came from nothing, managed to say something so powerful, something that seemed to touch a part of him he'd kept hidden for so long? And as he prepared to confront her, a sinking feeling in his stomach told him that what Hope had said was just the beginning. He was about to uncover something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. But the question remained, would he ever truly understand the pain Hope had spoken of? The answer, as Richard would soon learn, would change everything. As the story unfolds, we will dive deeper into the lives of Richard and Hope. Who is Hope really? What is the painful truth she's hiding? How far will Richard go to understand the woman who dared to challenge him? Stay tuned to find out what happens next. The days after that tense evening were full of unanswered questions for Richard Langford. He couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that Hope's words had sparked something inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Every time he tried to concentrate on his work or enjoy his usual luxuries, the memory of her voice, calm yet firm, echoed in his mind. You don't know what true pain is. Richard had lived a life of wealth and privilege. From a young age, he had been taught that success was everything, that if you worked hard enough, you could buy anything, even happiness. But the truth was, he had never known real happiness. His heart had grown cold with ambition and loss, and now, as he looked at the polished walls of his mansion, he realized how empty they truly were. It wasn't long before he found himself searching for answers. He couldn't confront Hope directly, not yet, but something in him knew that whatever she was hiding was something he needed to understand. So, he did what he thought was best. He began observing her more closely. Every morning, Hope would arrive at the mansion early. She was always punctual, always composed, but there was something different about her now. Her eyes, once full of quiet optimism, now seemed weighed down with a sadness Richard couldn't quite understand. He began to notice the small things, how she would avoid his gaze when he walked into a room, how she worked with quiet intensity. But there was a heaviness in her every step. Richard watched from the shadows, trying to piece together the mystery of this woman who had once been so kind to him, yet now seemed so distant. He began to wonder if the words she had spoken were more than just anger. Were they a cry for help? It was on the fourth day after the dinner that he finally decided to confront her, but not in the way he had originally planned. Instead of ordering her to his office or calling her out in front of the staff, he waited until late that evening, when the house was quiet, and he knew she would be finishing her chores for the night. He found her in the kitchen, her back to him as she cleaned up after dinner. The soft glow of the overhead lights cast shadows on her face, but he could still see the weariness in her posture. "Hope," Richard called softly, his voice quieter than usual. "We need to talk." She froze for a moment, as if she had been expecting this. Then, slowly, she turned to face him. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes, those eyes that had once been full of warmth, were now guarded. "Yes, Mr. Langford?" she asked, her tone professional. But there was an underlying tension in the way she held herself. Richard hesitated, unsure of what to say next. This wasn't something he had prepared for. He had always been the one in control, the one who dictated the conversation. But now, it felt as if he were walking into unknown territory, unsure of what he would find. "I want to understand something," Richard said, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "You said something the other night, something that's been bothering me. You told me I don't know what true pain is, and I need to know why. What did you mean by that?" Hope's eyes softened slightly, but she didn't immediately respond. Instead, she glanced down at the floor for a brief moment, as if contemplating whether or not she should say more. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "I meant exactly what I said, Mr. Langford. You have everything, money, power, status, but there are things that money can't buy. Pain, for example. True pain isn't something that can be washed away with luxury or status. It's something you carry with you, every day. It shapes you, and no amount of wealth can change that." Richard's heart raced as he listened to her words. There was something so raw and real about the way she spoke, something that pierced through his carefully constructed world of success and wealth. He wanted to ask her more, to understand her better, but he couldn't bring himself to do it just yet. The weight of her words was too much to process, all at once. Instead, he nodded slowly. "I see," he said, his voice barely audible. "And, you're right, I don't understand, but maybe I can try. If you'll let me." Hope didn't respond immediately. She simply nodded, a small, sad smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I don't expect you to understand, Mr. Langford. No one can truly understand another person's pain unless they've lived through it themselves." There was a long pause, the silence heavy with unspoken emotions. Then, just as Richard thought the conversation was over, Hope spoke again. "You know," she said softly, "I didn't always want to be a maid, but life doesn't always give you the choices you want. Sometimes, you just have to survive, and survival means doing things you never thought you'd have to do. I'm here because I had no other choice, but that doesn't mean I'm happy. or that I've forgotten what it cost me." Oh, Richard stood there, stunned by her honesty. He had never heard anyone speak like this to him before, not with such vulnerability and truth. It was as if Hope had laid bare a part of herself that no one, not even he, had ever seen. "Hope," he said quietly, "you don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. But, if you ever do decide to share more with me, I'll be here to listen." Hope smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile he had come to know over the years. It was bittersweet, full of sadness. "Thank you," she whispered. And just as quickly as the conversation had started, Hope turned away, returning to her work, leaving Richard standing there in the dimly lit kitchen, his mind swirling with questions. But before he could process what had just happened, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the mansion. Richard's heart skipped a beat. He turned sharply, his eyes narrowing in alarm. What was that noise? Hope, too, turned, her face pale as she stared at the direction of the noise. Neither of them spoke, but they both knew something had just gone horribly wrong. Chapter 3. The crash echoed through the mansion, a sharp, jarring sound that sent Richard's heart racing. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. He glanced over at Hope, who stood equally still, her face drained of color. Neither of them spoke, but the tension in the air was palpable. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Without thinking, Richard moved towards the sound, his legs moving faster than his mind could keep up. Hope followed closely behind him, her footsteps light but hurried. The sound had come from the grand staircase, the central point of the mansion, where most of the household staff kept to themselves. It was the area where Richard's late wife had spent her final days, and it still carried an eerie stillness. As they reached the top of the stairs, Richard's eyes darted around the corner. His breath caught in his throat. Lying sprawled on the marble floor, her arm twisted at an unnatural angle, was the housekeeper, Mrs. Wallace. Blood was seeping from a wound on her forehead, and her face was pale. Hope gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Richard's face went cold. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice cracking slightly as he knelt beside the housekeeper. But the woman didn't respond. Hope looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. She must have fallen. I don't know why or how." Richard's mind raced, his thoughts spinning with questions. Was it truly an accident? Or had something or someone caused this? He quickly scanned the area for any signs of foul play, but nothing seemed out of place. The lights were dim, the quiet was unnerving, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed deeper than they should be. His gaze turned to Hope, who was already checking on Mrs. Wallace, her hands trembling as she gently pressed her fingers to the woman's pulse. "She's still breathing," Hope whispered, "but she needs help. Fast." Richard didn't waste a second. He pulled out his phone, dialing the emergency number, his hands shaking. As he waited for the operator, his mind raced. Why had the housekeeper been here at this time of night? And why had she fallen? Hope, who was still crouched beside Mrs. Wallace, glanced up at Richard, her expression filled with concern. She shouldn't have been here. Not at this hour. Richard shot her a quick, questioning glance. "What do you mean?" Hope hesitated for a moment, then stood up slowly, avoiding Richard's gaze. "Mrs. Wallace. She wasn't always trustworthy," Hope said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She had secrets. Secrets she kept from you." Richard frowned, a sinking feeling settling in his chest. "What kind of secrets?" Hope didn't answer immediately, her eyes focused on the unconscious woman in front of her. Then, as if gathering her courage, she finally spoke. "I don't know everything, Mr. Langford, but I know she had been talking to someone she was scared of. She had meetings late at night, like this. I thought it was just rumors, but now..." Richard's heart raced. "Who was she meeting? What are you trying to tell me, Hope?" Hope looked at him, her face grim. "I don't know all the details, but I'm starting to think that Mrs. Wallace's fall wasn't an accident. Someone wanted her silenced, and that someone might be closer than we think." Richard stood up abruptly, his pulse quickening. "I need answers, Hope. I need to know everything. Now." Hope stepped back, her eyes full of uncertainty. She had never seen Richard like this before, desperate, shaken. And though she knew she had only scratched the surface of the truth, she also knew that revealing more could put them both in danger. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. A man's voice, low and authoritative, called from the shadows. "What's going on here?" Both Richard and Hope turned to see a tall, dark figure standing at the entrance of the hallway. It was James, the head of security, a no-nonsense type of man who had been working for Richard for over a decade. His steely eyes scanned the scene, taking in the blood-stained floor, the unconscious housekeeper, and the tension between the two people standing in front of him. "Mr. Langford," James said, his voice steady but with a hint of concern. "What happened?" Richard looked at James, his frustration mounting. "I don't know," she fell, "but Hope thinks it might not have been an accident." James stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Hope. "What do you mean? What's going on here?" Hope hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. She knew the danger of speaking out, but Richard was right. Something wasn't adding up. "I think someone might have pushed her. She was hiding something. Someone wanted her dead. And I think she knew too much." James's face hardened. "You need to be careful what you say, Hope. If this is true, this could get us all in trouble." Richard took a deep breath, his mind spinning with possibilities. This was not the peaceful evening he had envisioned. No, something far more sinister was unfolding, and he wasn't sure who he could trust anymore. As James went to make a call to the paramedics, Richard turned back to Hope, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Who could have done this? Who's the person she was meeting? Hope opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, another loud noise interrupted their conversation. This time, it was coming from the library. Richard froze, fear coursing through his veins. What was happening? Was someone inside the mansion? Were they all in danger? Without a word, he rushed to the library. Hope and James closed behind him. The door was cracked open, and as Richard pushed it open, his heart nearly stopped. Inside, the room was a mess. Books were scattered across the floor, the furniture overturned, and the once orderly space now looked like a war zone. But it wasn't the mess that caught Richard's attention, it was the figure standing in the middle of the room, facing the far wall. The figure turned slowly as Richard, Hope, and James entered, and when the man's face came into view, Richard's blood ran cold. It was someone he knew, someone he had trusted, someone who had been working for him for years. But why was he here? What had he done? And why did Richard suddenly feel as though his world was crashing down around him? Richard's heart raced as he stared at the figure in the library. The man standing there was none other than Gregory, one of Richard's oldest and most trusted associates. He had been working for Richard for nearly 15 years, handling business matters that Richard couldn't always oversee himself. He was smart, sharp, and had always been loyal. But now, standing in the middle of the wrecked library, Gregory's presence felt like a betrayal Richard could not comprehend. "Gregory." Richard's voice was shaky, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "What are you doing here?" Gregory didn't answer immediately. His expression was unreadable, a strange calmness about him that only made Richard more uneasy. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice smooth, calculated. "I think it's time, Mr. Langford, that you learned the truth," he said, his tone cold and distant. "The mansion, the staff, everything you've built, it was never truly yours to control." Hope stepped forward, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "What do you mean? What are you saying?" Gregory smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was the smile of someone who had spent too long hiding their true nature. "I've been working for you for a long time, Hope, for all of you. But the truth is, your wealthy lives were never meant to be." Richard's confusion deepened. "What are you talking about? Everything I've worked for, everything you've worked for, Richard, is just a facade," Gregory interrupted, his voice rising with intensity. "You think you own everything, that you control it all. But there's something much darker, much deeper at play here, and it's been under your nose this entire time." Richard felt his throat tighten. The words were like a weight pressing down on his chest. How could someone like Gregory, who had been so integral to his success, be telling him something so outlandish? Hope's voice broke through the tension. "What have you done, Gregory? What are you hiding?" Gregory glanced at her briefly before turning his attention back to Richard. "It's not about what I've done, Hope. It's about what you don't know. The people you trust, the ones who've been feeding you lies for years. They've been manipulating you, using you. Your wealth? It's not entirely your own. There's someone else involved, someone you've been working with, without even realizing it." Richard's mind reeled. Someone else? Who could it be? For years, he had kept his business dealings tight-knit, only trusting a handful of people. Was there someone in his inner circle who had been betraying him all along? Hope, sensing the shift in Richard's demeanor, stepped closer. "Who's behind all this, Gregory?" she demanded. "Tell us now." Gregory let out a breath, almost as if he were savoring the moment. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Hope, but I'll say this. It's someone very close to you, someone you never suspected. Richard took a step forward, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. Enough with the games. Who is it? Gregory looked directly at him, his eyes cold and piercing. Your own son, Richard. Nathaniel. He's been playing you from the beginning. Richard felt his world tilt, his mind struggling to comprehend the words. Nathaniel? His own son? It didn't make sense. Nathaniel was the one person Richard had always trusted, the one person he had hoped would take over the business after him. No, Richard whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. That's impossible. Nathaniel would never do that. But Gregory's smile didn't waver. You think he's been playing the good son all these years? You think he's been loyal to you? Think again. He's been working with someone on the outside, someone powerful. They've been pulling the strings, using you as a pawn in a much larger game. And now they're coming for everything you have. Hope stepped back, her expression unreadable. She, too, was struggling to come to terms with what Gregory was revealing. Richard's thoughts were spinning, each one crashing into the next. Could this really be true? Could his own son, the one he had raised, the one he had trusted more than anyone else, be plotting against him? No, Richard said again, this time with more certainty. You're lying. This is just another game you're playing, trying to manipulate me. Gregory's expression didn't change. It's not a game, Richard. You've been played, and now it's too late to stop it. Richard's stomach dropped. He couldn't breathe. The betrayal was too much to bear. His son, his own flesh and blood, was behind this. The very thought was a blow to his chest. I need to speak to Nathaniel, Richard said, his voice shaky but firm. Now, Gregory shook his head. It's too late. Nathaniel isn't coming to save you. In fact, he's already preparing to take everything. All your money, all your power. He's already signed the papers, Richard. He's been working with the people you never even knew existed. Richard's pulse quickened. What papers? What are you talking about? Gregory stepped closer, lowering his voice. The deeds, Richard. The contracts. The wealth. It's all in his name now. And by the time you realize what's happening, it will be too late to fight back. Richard's mind was in turmoil. His life, everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed, was slipping away from him, and it was happening right under his nose. His own son had betrayed him. But why? What was Nathaniel's motivation? What had turned him against his own father? Hope, sensing the weight of the moment, stepped forward again. Gregory, enough! What do you want from us? What's your role in all of this? Gregory's gaze softened for a moment, but it was fleeting. I'm just the messenger, Hope. I've been the one tasked with making sure Richard knows the truth before it's all gone. Nathaniel will make his move soon, and I don't think Richard is prepared for it. As Gregory's words sank in, Richard's world seemed to shatter before him. His son, the one person he had thought was his ally, had been plotting behind his back. But why? What had driven Nathaniel to this point? Was it greed, betrayal, or something far darker? Before Richard could say another word, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Nathaniel. Richard's hand trembled as he unlocked the phone. The message read, "It's too late, Father. I've already made my move. You're out of the game." Stay tuned for the part 2, as Richard races against time to confront his son and uncover the full extent of the betrayal. What will happen when father and son face each other? How far will Nathaniel go to claim everything? The truth is just beginning to unfold.